Welcome back, fellow adventurers, to another captivating episode of the Corner of Story and Game. Today we embark on a profound journey into the art of game design, examining 4 more of the lenses. To help us on our way, we have the narrative design genius, Bárbara Framil. With a distinguished career in the entertainment industry, Barbara's expertise in immersive world building and player-centric storytelling has left a mark on critically acclaimed projects such as Showdown and the Crysis franchise. Together, we're going to delve into 4 of the lenses: emotion, the storytelling machine, the hero's journey, and story. Bárbara, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm super excited, and I think it's great to have this kind of spaces to critically talk about narrative in video games, so I think you're doing a fantastic job.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And congratulations to you and your team on the recent release of Nightingale.
Thank you so much. We're so excited.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I'm spending way too much time in there already, so.
Oh, me too. I gotta say, it's kind of like embarrassing to say just how much I've been playing my own game.
That's a good sign. That's not embarrassing.
Yeah, I work all day on Nightingale, then I go home, and I still want to play Nightingale.
Good. Okay, well, we're going to throw Nightingale in here and there, I'm sure, but we're actually here to talk today because this is the second episode in a series talking about the lenses from the art of game design by Jesse Schell. So today we're going to dive in and talk critically about a couple of the lenses, actually 4 technically, but we'll just hit on each one. And I'm just picking from your experience, from your frame of reference, your insight on each one. So, but before we do that, I like to start with a little bit of a grounding on your history. Where did you come from? How did you fall in love with gaming in general? What kind of games did you play? And how did your career get you here today?
Well, I fell in love with games from an early age. I was the youngest sibling in the family. So I have 2 brothers. They're like 7 and 6 years older than me. So I grew up watching them playing games before I was even, able to hold the controller on my hand. So some of my early memories are just watching one of my brothers playing Ultima Online. And I was fascinated by the game, the environment. And my brother would not allow me to play. It was his time playing. And I mean, I was like 5 at the time. So it was not meant for me. I was not the target audience for that game. But I remember just hearing about all the stories of the adventures that my brother would go into. He was building a ship and exploring with his friend and meeting people. And it all felt so magical to me. And I would sneak into his computer and try to play. And I didn't even speak English at the time. So I was not understanding anything about the game. But I just loved making a character and exploring and building and just having a good time and making my own stories in that universe. So I always loved video games. I just never thought that I could work on video games. That felt so far away, right? We don't know people that, it doesn't feel like a career path when you're growing up, at least for my generation. And so when I realized I wanted to be a writer, a storyteller, I tried for a more realistic plan, and I decided to be a screenwriter.
Oh, okay.
That was my backup plan, the one that was realistic. So you can imagine how happy my parents were. But I actually went to study film. I worked as a screenwriter for a little bit. And at the same time, I was working on my own small projects for video games, just by myself or with friends. And eventually, there was actually an opening for a narrative designer in my city, in São Paulo. And I went for it and I got the job. And it was a surprise for me that I could actually, make a living writing for video games. But I haven't looked back ever since.
Wow. I'm always curious. Did you play like tabletop games, board games, or was it all video games as a child?
As a child, it was mostly online games, digital games. But as a teenager and then into adulthood, I started playing tabletop and fell in love with it. So now I'm completely obsessed. But as a child, it wasn't like a common thing to have like a group of people playing, at least in my city. And it took me a while to get to know tabletop.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And now you're in Edmonton working away at Inflexion, which is so cool.
Yeah. So when I actually made the move to video games, I first started working for virtual reality games back in Brazil. I had a lot of fun there. And I think it really changed how I see narrative design and writing with the immersive aspect of virtual reality. It's something that I still carry on with all my projects, at least I try to. And eventually I started working at Crysis in Germany. That's where I worked on the Crysis franchise, so the next title that they're working with, and Hunt's Showdown as well. And now I am here working at Inflexion on Nightingale.
Right on. Yeah, I skipped Hunt's Showdown, and I should have mentioned that because that's a lot of fun too.
Yeah, I love Hunt.
Yeah, that's a great game. I never did get into Crysis. I hear it's fantastic, but Hunt I played a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't play as a kid at Crysis, but I also fell in love with the project when I joined the team.
Right on. Okay, well, let's dive into the lenses. The first one we're going to tackle today is, in lots of opinions, the most important one. I do believe it's right near the beginning, and that is the lens of emotion. So coming at game design and narrative writing through the lens of consideration for emotion. So as a senior narrative designer, how do you personally leverage the lens of emotion to evoke those powerful feelings and reactions from players?
Well, I like to think that my perspective on narrative design is very grounded on holistic design and emotional design. So I believe most of my job is working with emotions and trying to leverage them. I think it's important for any kind of game, of course, but especially for games that don't have a linear story. We are often relying on emotional design to pass a message, tell a story. And if you don't know how to work with that, if you're only working with the traditional tool sets of narrative and not thinking of how an emergent environment can also evoke emotions, it's going to be really hard to tell stories, to express feelings in an open-ended environment. And I think through the lenses in particular, I really like how they create a format, a paradigm on how to work with that. And basically, so what do you want your players to feel, what they are actually feeling, and how you bridge that gap. It's a very simple instructions through that lens that I think it helps so much, because a lot of how I approach that is through playtesting sometimes with the team, sometimes it's yourself. And when you have the option to get actual players and get their feedback, it's so helpful. And I worked in places that they had a questionnaire for narrative, something like that they would give to the players. And it was always something very focused on the understanding. So it was like, did you understand that the house was yellow? Or what was the motivation of this character? Who is the main character? And they went into that experience trying to get a yes or no, a right or wrong. And I hated that. And I started to go from that perspective of what are our expectations, what is the reality, and what do we make out of that? How do we bridge the gap? Or how do we embrace the emotions that are already there? So whenever I have the opportunity to actually speak with my players, I like to have more of a casual chat. But when I can't, the questionnaires I prepare are focused on that. What did you feel? What did you experience? And I think it helps the players understand that they don't need to sound smart. They don't need to, did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? It's about their experience, what was playing through their minds. And it helps a lot when you don't think of right or wrong. So we were aiming for this moment to be sad. And everyone is saying that they felt anger. Is this a bad thing? could the anger that we are actually providing here be the motivation for the next step? So that kind of thing that I try to leverage through the lens of emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem, I think, is when you start asking those questions and everyone's feeling something completely different. One player is feeling happy, another's feeling angry, another's feeling sad. And that's when you realize, okay, I think our design is all over the place and we need to find cohesion here.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are getting an emotion, sometimes it helps to understand why. And it might be good that it was not what you originally intended, but it's something that you can use. And if it's absolutely not what you want, then understand why these elements are provoking those feelings and how you bridge the gap and go back to your original intent.
That makes a lot of sense. So that's how you ensure that you're using the lens of emotion to get the right emotion out of a playtester. If you were to back up a step or more, when you're the actual technical craft of creating a narrative, are there tools or techniques you use in order to make sure you're steering the narrative towards an emotional reaction?
For sure. I could actually turn this into a 3-hour conversation about emotional design. But some of the guidelines, some of the initial steps. First, the most important part is cohesion and holistic design. You are not going to evoke emotions through the words alone. It's pointless to keep trying to create your entire story in a silo and not involve audio-visual mechanics, how the systems interact. All of those pieces are part of the emotional design. And even if your story, the words there, the dialogue, they are perfectly evoking a certain emotion, if they contrast, if they create conflict with the mechanics, sounds, etc., it's just going to feel messy and you're going to lose the emotional experience there. Right. The second step that I think is really important is helping the player feel open to an emotional experience. Because whenever we're trying to invite the player to be immersed in something, we're asking them to be vulnerable. That's also something that's like, it's a big responsibility for us to invite someone to be immersed in something. So it's also, we need to earn that trust and we need to be respectful of that trust. We don't want to use our powers for evil. But there's also this point of, going through the magic circle, the moment that the player leaves their reality and enters fantasy. And they're doing that all of the time. And we just don't, the first time is the most important, but there are many other opportunities where we can break that and they will go back to their reality. And I try to ground them on who, why, and where. So where is the easiest, right? Usually the first that we think. If we are creating a story in space, the moment you see you are in space, or the moment you see that place is dangerous, the moment you see that this place is beautiful, all of that is super helpful to bring that sense of immersion, to be open to the experience. But I like to go from immersion to a sense of presence. Not only that you believe that you are in this environment, but that you believe that you belong there, that you exist in that space. And that's where the who and the why come from. So the who is like, who am I in this world? Because even if you're the kind of player that really likes to play like yourself, closest to your own personality, we're still asking you to take on a role. Mm-hmm. And some games will have like very, very strict characters. So this is who you are. And others are letting you like kind of choose what type of person you are. But there are still like certain choices. So for Nightingale, you are in the Victorian age. So even if you are yourself, you want to play as you, but you're going to play you in the Victorian age. And what elements do I give you to kind of feel that you are yourself or someone else in the Victorian age, that you care about the calamity that happened here. So all of those little pieces that help you embody a character are super helpful. And then the why, it's really connected to the actions, but every time we are asking the player to perform an action or giving them the possibility of performing an action, if their motivations are not aligned, so if we tell you, go eat food, but your character is not hungry, if you're not feeling hungry, even like silly things like that, you start to feel like, why am I doing this? And if the player is asking that, they're also moving away from the emotional experience. Mm-hmm. So having this foundation of the player understanding who they are, not only understanding, but like feeling that they are that person. So having elements that help ground them and then embody that character, aligning their ludological goals with the narrative context so that they're closer to the emotional state that their character would be. And then having the environment, the place that really sells the danger, the beauty, the sense of exploration. If all that comes together, it's so much easier to get the player to have other types of emotional experiences, more complex situations that you want to create, because the foundation is there and they're open to feeling.
Wow. That's incredible. And we need to move on to the next lens, but you raised a couple of questions in my head. One is, how involved is the narrative department with the environmental design? Because you talk about how important environmental design is for making it gorgeous and setting the mood, but also I'm sure for setting clues about the world or telling the story. Do you get involved with environmental design as well?
So I think my approach to design is always holistic. So we all have our areas of experience or areas of ownership, and we don't want to step on anyone's toes, but we need to be working together and communicating. Yeah. So when it comes to world building, lore, it's very shared between different departments. Of course, the narrative loves to create all the little details and why certain things behave this way or that. But it's pointless to just write lots and lots of documentations that are not going to be part of the game. So you need to be communicating with your systems department, for example. Are all these explanations on how the machines work aligned with how the players are going to interact with them? That sort of thing. And it's the same for environmental art. So it's this thin line of who gets the final say. You never want to get to a point that you are fighting and there's a conflict and who decides. So it should be more about how can I help your job and how can you help mine? Because we all want to make the best game. So I love collaborating with artists, and I feel like they love collaborating with us as well. So like I usually the artists have so many ideas for, I created this, I have this idea for an environment, so a location that looks like this. Do you think it would make sense for, if I'm creating a garden, do you think we could have an actual character that created this garden for a reason? And they love sharing those ideas and we love receiving them. And when we tell them, so there's this lore about this place and we think the light could help us tell the story, they usually geek out with us as well. So it's all about communication and collaboration. So
yeah, it's such a collaborative art form. Really it is. It's interesting, environmental, with Nightingale is beautiful and open and sweeping. And then Hunt is spooky and tight and swamps, and it's such a difference. It's fantastic.
Have you been to the Gloom realm in Nightingale yet?
Not yet, no. Spoilers.
Be prepared.
I can't wait now. I know what I'm doing tonight. So, there's one other thing that when you were talking about playtesting, this is a conversation that's come up with some friends of mine lately, is the concept of playtesting narrative in the prototype early ideation phase. Ways to test just even a slice of the narrative, just to see if it's going to land. Have you seen any good techniques for that?
I really love this one technique, but I'm going to feel awful right now because it came from a Twitter thread a long time ago, and I've been using it, but I don't remember who to give credit for. but I think it's hard to test narrative early on when you think about the story elements, because in the sense of like story and narrative, so the narrative experience being something a little bit different than the story, the meta story itself, because it changes so much, right? The story is going to change a lot over time. And sometimes you don't have it written at the beginning. And if you try to just sort of pass the idea along, but the dialogue, you didn't have enough time to write a polished dialogue. If your characters are still coming up with the backstory and how they interact, it's going to look like a first draft because it is a first draft. And sometimes you're going to get a negative reaction, not because the story is bad, but because it's a first draft. And you don't want to let go of an idea because it didn't have enough time to mature. But one thing that I find really helpful to test early on are your narrative systems, your narrative structure. So the basic ways that players will communicate with the world, how they will understand their choices and their impact in the universe. And there was this Twitter thread a long time ago that was suggesting how a prototype for Life is Strange would have been done, for example. And you could test the main mechanics and how the possibility of rewinding time and being faced with the opportunity to change your choices and see the different outcomes, you could have tested that narrative experience with a completely different story. And it's a way to at least get an understanding of what parts of this rewinding mechanic are not working, what the players are feeling more connected with, what is eliciting the most emotion, and how are they feeling regretful of their choices? Are they feeling excited to explore all different ramifications? So certain things that you can create a hypothesis for and test through that sort of like, okay, I'm just going to create a completely different story, but test the ways that the player can interact with that. I've been doing that ever since. And it is confusing sometimes because I worked with teams that did not understand, even as we try to explain, these are not the main characters that are going to go for the final game. These are just, the character created for the prototype. And people would be confused and later on, oh, but what happened to that person? And like, no, the character was never meant to stay. So it can also create some confusion.
Yeah.
But I got some really good answers early on about strategies for storytelling that were not working. And then we had time to fix that earlier.
That's very cool. And it's also a perfect segue into the next lens. Because the next lens we're going to talk about is the lens of the story machine, which is creating narrative systems that allow the telling of stories. And I think you might have kind of touched on my next question line of thinking here, but I'm curious, how do you integrate that lens, the lens of creating narrative systems, the story machine, into your work as a narrative designer?
I think the lens of the story machine communicates really well with the lens of emergence. So with the lens of emergence, talking about making you as a designer understand what kind of verbs am I giving to my player, what kind of elements they have to use those verbs with, all of that. I think we should have a similar mindset when thinking of how our game generates new stories. And I think a lot of those elements are invisible because we have elements that are like only in the player's head. So what kind of person am I here? So in a game that you have different, like we are letting the player role play and choose their character. So what kind of player fantasies do I have at work here? Do we have a player who is going to want to be the hero? The player who wants to be the anti-hero? The player who straight up wants to be the villain? What kind of... and of course, what am I allowing or not in the game? Because we're still creating the rules. It's not complete freedom. We have an environment here, and maybe in this game, you cannot be the villain. You can be the anti-hero, that sort of thing.
Sure.
So a lot of those system parts are completely invisible and only happening in the player's head. But whenever we create a choice or we introduce a conflict, all of those invisible parts are also playing in the result. So they're also like subjects that can interact with verbs, that will interact with other characters if you have NPCs, and it becomes something really substantial. And it is great when we can actually turn those invisible things into mechanical parts of the game. So whenever we can actually, because whenever it is part of the system, it is easier to communicate to the player. For example, when they are being, they are given a choice, because sometimes they don't realize that if they don't realize that what they're doing has consequences, it doesn't have the same impact. They don't feel the same weight of the moment of choice. But at the same time, certain situations, you want them to be invisible, because if you make everything very systemic, you can sort of go back to that immersion break, right? Whenever everything looks very much like I am getting +2 friendship because I said this thing, it can become less of a conversation, less of a natural expression of the player's freedom, and it becomes about metagaming. So I like to think as much as how can we leverage the mechanics that we already have in the game and not create an entirely different mechanic for the storytelling systems. Although I love games that do that as well. One of my favorite games is RimWorld, which is basically a story generator.
Yep.
So I love that kind of experience as well. But in a lot of the games that I've worked on, my mindset was we have these core mechanics in the game, and how do I add more narrative meaning to them? And how do I play with these invisible elements of motivation, of prior commitments that the player might have had, prior interactions, prior knowledge, I like this character, so now I am biased towards this side. So all of those things that are invisible, but they are very meaningful to the player experience, I try to find opportunities to leverage them with the mechanics that we already have.
Neat. You may not have an answer, but can you think of a specific time or a specific example where you've worked with one of those dynamic systems to create immersion in a story?
I have a good example of what I was describing of, finding extra narrative meaning to create new emergent experiences with mechanics that we already have.
Yeah.
So in Hunt, a lot of the extra storytelling beats that we added in the past, I'm no longer there. So a lot of the storytelling comes from new characters that we introduce in the game. So we usually try to align those characters with player fantasies, with player desired archetypes, and sometimes they are completely from the more narrative side. So I want to play a cowboy, I want to play a scientist, that sort of thing. But we always wanted to combine that with gameplay fantasies as well. So are you playing as the lone wolf? So are you a solo player that doesn't need any friends? And we would like to create characters that played into that gameplay fantasy of playing alone. Maybe you're more of like a strategist, and we will give you a character that is a sniper that plays from far away. And we also love to create like drama between the characters. And one of the great examples was actually characters that were written not by me, but by Umut, my dear friend Umut, another narrative designer. He created this set of characters. They were all supposed to be wolf-themed. And there was no restrictions that they needed to be together, that they need to have any sort of relationship. But Umut created the storyline that one character was the son of a couple, so the other two were married, And this character was their son, and they had betrayed their parents. And the storyline was that this character was in the bios, fleeing, and the parents were hunting him down. And we had done similar stories like many other characters, but this time it really resonated with players, and we started seeing in gameplays, like Twitch streams, that players would start going as duels as the parents and started hunting down the other character. It was called the Lonely Howl. They would be hunting Lonely Howls and trying to kill them to fulfill the revenge story of the characters. And it was, I think a lot of people think whenever we talk about narrative systems or creating narrative emergence, that it's going to cost a lot, that you're going to create a new entire system from scratch, and it's going to be so hard for your team to develop that. But sometimes it's simply creating meaning with the mechanics you already have. And the players will, if the players embrace that, it can create so many stories and become a story machine, because every player will have a different experience with that. Some of them will tell a story about how the parents actually hunt down the child and killed him, and others will have a story about a lonely howl that saw that he was being followed, but he managed to flee, or maybe they come together and decide to work together. So we're creating the beginning of a story and letting the players tell the end.
Those stories that emerge out of the games, those are some of the best stories.
Yes, I love them so much.
All right, so the next lens that we're going to tackle is, it's an odd one, but I figured we'll throw it in here because I'm curious about your opinion on this, and that is the lens of the hero's journey. Now, the hero's journey is a very old and it's kind of a timeless narrative structure, I suppose. Some people believe in it, some people don't these days. I guess, first of all, I'm curious about your opinion on the hero's journey, and then is taking a step back, how do you personally incorporate elements of this lens in your work?
Well, I agree that the hero's journey has become very controversial lately, and there seems to be a lot of love or hate. And I'm not in any of those sides. I don't like to work with absolutes usually. I think the hero's journey is one possible tool. Narrative structure is a very powerful tool for games. I think especially when we have a less linear storyline, working with structure helps us a lot to still create a cohesive experience, even when we have different events there, right? It helps us a lot you could ensure that every little branch is working together, but the bigger your story becomes, it is easier to work with structures that help you set the pace and the tone. And the hero's journey is one of those. And I think a lot of people get angry, and rightfully so, that it has kind of become the thing that it is the timeless narrative structure. Some people believe it's the only narrative structure and try to fit all the other possible structures. No, I'm going to prove that it is actually the hero's journey. And okay, we can debate on that or agree to disagree. But I think at the same time, it's not worth it to just say that it is useless, that there's no point using the hero's journey. And if you need a screwdriver and you're using a hammer, it doesn't mean that the hammer is broken, but yeah, maybe you need a screwdriver. But you need a hammer, and the hero's journey can be a great hammer. So I think it's really important for, especially young writers, young storytellers, they need to learn about the hero's journey. There's no point in telling young storytellers just throw it out the window, because knowledge is power. So I think knowing the hero's journey and other narrative structures is very important, even if you want to completely subvert them. But it is important to understand why you're subverting them. Why are you not using a structure that is kind of like defined, that you're coming up with your own structure? So just the more knowledge, the better, I think.
That's a good way of looking at it. You mentioning subverting it with something so timeless, something that's been around so long. How do you make it fresh? Like if you're using the hero's journey as your structure, are there some really basic or something you need to keep in mind to ensure that you're not treading the same old path?
I mean, I think if the entire point is subverting the hero's journey, then you might as well not use the hero's journey. Unless, I mean, if the point is to be a parody or something, sometimes it's really good to just use the classical to, create a sense of, I know what's coming next, and then subvert it. And I actually have a good example of a time that I used the hero's journey, but it's still with some sort of differences there. So this game that I worked on, Pixel Ripped 1995, a VR game, at the core of the narrative, the emotional design, we wanted to bring nostalgia, the feeling of being back to childhood. The game is set in 1995, and you are playing as a child. So we really wanted to bring those memories of the 90s, for those who had them, or at least connecting them to their childhood somehow. And the team, like as we talked about the project and how we wanted to achieve our goals, we realized that a lot of our childhood memories, they were really mixed with fantasy. So sometimes you remember something from your childhood, but it's kind of mixed with a movie you were watching, a game you were playing, and you have these memories and you know that they cannot be real. It's impossible that it happened like that. But still, somehow the sounds are sharper, the colors are more vibrant, and it feels like a movie in your head. So we wanted to kind of bring the sense of nostalgia, and especially because we wanted even younger generations that didn't live in the 90s to still kind of feel a certain feeling of nostalgia, of going back to their childhood. So we decided to make the game feel like you were in a 90s movie, like very blockbuster 90s movie, Christmas special. And for that, the hero's journey, and I mean, more specifically, the 3-act structure from films that, is heavily based on the hero's journey. So that was perfect for us to get this feeling of being inside a movie, being the protagonist of a blockbuster. So for our overall arc, that's what we use. But at the same time, another core theme of the game was, we called it what the F moments, but let's say...
You can swear on here if you want. That's fine. So... Yeah, you go right ahead.
It was the what the fuck moments, but let's say subverting expectations, creating chaos. That was also very much the core of the gameplay. Mm-hmm. And our lead game designer, Pedro Câmara, he used I hope I pronounce it correctly, the Kisho Tenketsu structure. It's a Japanese structure with 4 arcs, and it is based on introduction, development, twist, and conclusion. It has some... It became famous a while ago when people were calling it the structure without conflict, and people were like, it's impossible to make a story without conflict. But whatever. So the whole point of this story, this structure, it's more that, like the hero's journey, which the inciting incident is usually what drives the rest of the plot, and the structure is all about solving that or dealing with that inciting incident. This other structure, it flows a little bit more naturally in the beginning, and you feel that the story might be going one way, but the twist is the moment that really subvert your expectations, and then you have a conclusion. So that worked really well for our game because we wanted the player to feel that sense of familiarity, of being comfortable and nostalgic. And at some point we had the what the fuck moment when the rules were kind of changed, and then you had to adapt quickly to new obstacles, new restraints, and it came all together in a conclusion. So we actually ended up having the overall story being following the hero's journey, but for each chapter, so each level, we had the Kisho Tenketsu, which was level design and narrative design coming together to create those moments that whenever you were feeling comfortable, you got like thrown out. And it really also felt a lot like being a child, because, you know, when a child is telling a story, things grow more exaggerated, right? They're like, oh, I was there, and then this happened, this happened, this happened. So we kind of wanted that feeling as well in each chapter. And just combining those two different structures actually created a great result that achieved our goals.
Wow. That sounds like an amazing project. I want to dig it up. And I want to look into that story structure. I have not heard of that one before. That is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I learned to love it so much during that project. It's still one that I come back to frequently, especially, I think, when you don't have one unifying, inciting incident, which happens a lot when you're working with a more multiplayer environment, that the player can be coming from different areas of the game, you know, in an open world sort of game. I feel it helps a lot to still have this sense that things are evolving, things are changing, when you focus on the twist rather than the ramifications of the initial events.
Right. Just because I like things in threes, do you have a third favorite narrative structure besides those two? And throw you for a loop.
Let me think of a third. I mean, I really like the heroine's journey as well, as in opposition to the hero's journey. But I often go more for structures that are focusing on community rather than a protagonist. So that's something I can't pick one, but I really like that sort of more. The problem is not about one person solving the world, but how a community grows together. And there are a few interesting ones there, but it's more my type, especially considering the kind of games that I've been working on.
I like that. That sounds refreshing. It reminds me of, what was that Disney movie? Oh, my brain just stopped. The Disney movie with the family.
We don't talk about Bruno.
Yeah, it's the name of the movie. The story there was really about the whole family. It wasn't just her story.
Yeah, and I think that's very common in South American literature. And that movie that was with the name that we don't remember right now. Let me just Google it. Encanto. Okay.
Encanto.
Yes. So Encanto has a lot of the references and even like the style of magical realism that is really like it was popularized in South America. And I think those are the kind of stories that I grew up with. They are more focused, like a lot of our classical novels and films, they were more based on that structure of the story is about a group of people that evolve together and how the community reflects on the individual, but it's still about, keeping them together. And I love Encanto and how it brings that to a wider audience. And it's also something that I try to keep in my storytelling.
I love it. It's so refreshing for somebody who's, grew up in Canada or the United States. Let's go completely off script and just wander somewhere deep for a second. Taking that concept of a story that's based around a community as opposed to that strong individual, how do you translate that into video games?
And so I think video games are actually a great place to do that. There's something that actually Inflexion says a lot that was one of the reasons that made me want to work there, that they want to create games that are places, not necessarily thinking of a video game as a story, but a place that can tell stories and that can bring people together. And I see that, going back to how I first fell in love with video games, watching my brother play Ultima Online, and it was a very good representation of games as places. And all the stories that my brother was telling me, they were not the meta story of Ultima Online, but the experiences that he went ahead and had with his friends. So that's the kind of thing that I really like to bring. And in games like Nightingale and Showdown, I think they really represent this idea of it's a place or different places that you can visit and you can take on a role and make memories. And I really like seeing this type of storytelling that we are creating opportunities for memories, and we need to play a game of improv with the players, because of course we don't want it to feel like real life, right? We want this to be magical. We want the memories to be special. It's not randomized, just go there and do whatever. We want to create these touchstones of emotion and memorable situations. And it's all about, inviting the player, telling them, come here. And if they say yes, you keep going on the yes, and creating a unique experience.
It all comes back to improv too, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Every time. We could keep talking about this for another, maybe we should do another episode sometime and talk about video game and communal story and shared space and built worlds, because that's one of my passions as well. But we're doing lenses today.
Okay, let's go back.
So last lens we got to tackle today, and I think you're the perfect person for this. That's why I chose this one, is the lens of story. So emphasizing the crafting of compelling narratives that resonate with the players long after they've played the game. How do you approach crafting those memorable and impactful stories?
Yeah, I think it actually has a lot to do with what I was talking about, creating memories, because that's what we want, right? For them to remember those moments and tell their friends about it and really have this experience that stay with them. I think the improv part is really important in that. Again, thinking about the kind of game that I'm making that is less linear, more about, existing in a place and crafting your stories. Because I think it could be very different if we were approaching something more linear, which is also I love linear video games. Nothing against that. Just from my experience, from what I've been doing, I think I always go back to that who, why, where, to ground the player in the environment, to have them open to the experiences. Because if they're not open, they are just going to do their own thing and we lose them. And as much as they can have fun with certain aspects of the game, we want them to be enjoying the entire thing together, right? So I always like to get them in that state where they're open to live in the story. And then that's when you start crafting these unique experiences that are worth the investment of the player. I think a lot of just, we are inviting them to a place, and a place has a history. So a place has a backstory, let's say. A place has certain elements that you can interact with. A place is going to have its own culture, rules, that even a rule inside a house, a certain friend's house is going to be different from the rules of another friend's house. So you can have rules within rules. And you're going to have the elements of conflict, which are the people usually. So you have so many elements there. And again, going back to all the other lenses, right? Your lens of emergence. So what kind of verbs you're giving the player to interact with those elements. Your lens of story machines, so how they interact together to create new stories. And you can rely on all that, and at the same time, for really touchstones of things that you want to be, that this is unescapable, this is the moment that really defines things. You cannot forget all the others. You need to get the player to want to be there, to feel that they have the right motivations to be there, because the game of improv ends if we say no to the player, right? The player can say no to us and we cry, but we cannot say no to the player. And the moment that they think that it's not about complete freedom. It's not saying that they are allowed to do whatever they want. There are rules in this place. There is a culture. There are conventions in this place. But the moment that they feel that they are being forced in a direction that their character wouldn't do that. And I love when I hear that from players when they don't understand why they don't like the story, but then they're like, I wouldn't do that. And it's so powerful that they feel such a strong emotion, and that leads me to believe they are immersed. If they had such a strong reaction to, my character wouldn't do that. And we want them to remember the moment that they start saying, like in third person, my character wouldn't do that, it's kind of when we lost them. We want them to talk to us like, I did that, and I went there, and then I became friends with this other character. Whenever we are putting them together, character and player are one, and they feel like all those moments, all those actions, even actions that we kind of forced them to do, but they didn't realize, that's when it becomes a memory, because they feel like they had an impact in the story. And it's the ones that if you were traveling to a distant island and you came back, those were the moments that you tell your friends about. Yeah. And I want my players to leave the game and go tell stories of their vacation to their friends, because they are memories and not because they were watching something happen.
Right. That's powerful. That's right there. With so many moving parts and allowing player agency, how do you ensure that the narrative remains consistent and coherent with your vision, your goal, what you're set out to do with the story or the game?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Going back to like what I said, that freedom does not, like agency is not total freedom. A lot of people get scared when they are moving from like writing novels, films, to going to video games. There's this moment where they kind of think that they have no control, so nothing matters. They go through an existential crisis. And whenever I see that happening with a fellow writer or a like student, I try to bring them back to, no, we have a lot of control. We control the rules of this world. Mm-hmm. So if we don't want our players to go and kill all of their characters, take away their guns. Mm-hmm. When you go into a peaceful zone, those are the rules. You cannot shoot in this area. And usually you won't see players complaining about rules that are well communicated. They will complain when they don't understand or when something is inconsistent.
Right.
So if just during, like you're in the same area that you had a gun 2 seconds ago, but now we just remove your gun out of nowhere, that's when you complain, because that doesn't make sense. That breaks my immersion. But when you have a strict rule, you enter the peaceful village, you cannot smack people around, they will usually understand and be okay. And aside from that, I think something that is really helpful is to think of the moving parts that the player has an impact on and the areas that they don't. Usually I like to think of the overall arc of this world, especially when you think about a shared world, right? So multiplayer games that you are not the only hero there. But when you have like this, or, even games where it is single player, but we know there's going to be a sequel, you cannot completely change the fate of the world. I like to think of like this plot-driven structure and the character-driven structure. So the plot-driven, the player will have less of an impact on, which is similar to life, right? We don't control all the events, the bigger world events. We can enact change, but it's very realistic. It's very easy to create a believable story where you're not completely in control of the world events. And the part that I really like to give player full agency is the character-driven emotional subplot. So how your character feels about what's going on with the world is up to you. And I like to give as many avenues for you to express your feelings, to express like my character wants to do this peacefully. My character wants to do this loud and aggressively and make a fuss about it because I'm really angry about this horrible situation. Go for it. Go and enact change in the world in your own way. And I feel this is very powerful. And at the same time, it keeps things a little bit more in order, because the player is still having a lot of agency, but it remains confined to their world state. And we don't have to make sure that the next 3 games in line are going to follow all the world events that you completely changed.
Right. Smart. Well, that is the lenses that we are going to tackle today. But there's another big question. It's a question I ask everybody that comes on the show. It's the question that lives at the heart of this social experiment. And that question is, in my opinion, there exists this sacred space in the center where stories and games and performance and playwrights and musicians, we all meet and we hang out and we play games together. If you agree with me, what do you think is the magical thread that holds all this together?
That's a hard one. It all comes back to feeling and story and, dreaming. And when I go back to that, I think this thread that keeps us all together is that we question things. We all really like to question. I think storytellers are usually, they were in the past, one of those kids that are always asking, why,
Mm-hmm.
And you give an answer, but what if it was like this? But what if that? So we can call ourselves dreamers, but maybe we're just stubborn and like to question everything. But I think that the power to imagine that things could be different, and not only that, it's not enough to only imagine. We want to make it real somehow. I think that really brings storytellers together.
Amen. I think Stubborn Dreamers is a good name for like a studio or a band or something. Kind of hang on to that one. Stubborn Dreamers.
Yeah.
My next podcast.
I would watch that.
My follow-up question to that typically, though, is, in your opinion, why are stories and storytellers important?
Oh, that's a big one. I think my answer to that changed over time, changes constantly during my career. I am a firm believer that art should be allowed to exist just for art's sake, right? But especially now that we're living through some really rough times, it's hard not to question what's my role, how am I contributing to the state of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think storytellers are important because stories are powerful, and powerful can mean good or bad, right? Because I think like real change only comes through like community, through like collective action and people coming together, organizing and debating ideas.
Yeah.
But stories do have the power to alienate people, to keep them inside their bubbles, to keep them looking inwards and not outwards. So I think as storytellers, we have a responsibility to do the exact opposite as well. Because power stories have the power to do the opposite, to get people to see the world through different lenses, to go back to the stubborn dreamers, to question, why are things like this? They could be different. There are other ways to live. There are other ways to interact with people. And I think bringing people back to this critical thinking of re-examining their lives, re-examining society and the structures that we adhere to, and how things could be different, things could be better, things could be worse. All of that is really important to get people talking again, looking outside and debating ideas and hopefully coming together to enact change. So I think stories can do a lot of damage, but they can also do a lot of right. And I hope we stay in the right side of history.
Kind of part of our responsibility as storytellers, I think.
Sure.
And games have a place to play in that, do you think?
Oh, for sure.
Excellent.
Especially when we think back again to the lens of the story machine, right? I really, really like the let's say, theory, I would say like the paradigm of procedural rhetoric. So how games can tell a story or convey a message through the system itself. So how you are over and over doing the same sort of actions, and this environment is telling you what is right and what is wrong. Games are really powerful to teach people how to think, because it's basically, doing something over and over and getting you did good, a nice sound that makes you like all the dopamine go to your body. Yeah. So it's really powerful, and it can be dangerous. And again, when I mentioned that whenever we ask people to be immersed, that we're asking them to be vulnerable. So we have to keep all of that in mind. And what kind of message are we teaching? Let's say, what kind of behaviors are we saying that in our world, this kind of behavior is acceptable, this kind of behavior is rewarded? All of that is really powerful, and not saying that there's a right or wrong way to do this, but we need to be mindful to engage with our own work critically and be aware of the responsibility we bear.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's it for the deep stuff.
Amazing.
Okay, we're heading close to the end here. I like to do something I call a quick fire round. It's just a couple of questions to get to know you better, so everybody has a little better idea of who you are. They're really easy. What are you playing right now?
Nightingale. No, okay. I am playing. It's true that I'm playing it a lot, but let me see. Another game that I haven't been able to put down is Shadows of Doubt.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a procedural world where you are a detective and there are lots of murder mysteries to solve, and you cannot Google the answer because it's procedural. I love the game so much.
That's so cool. What are you reading right now?
I just started a book that I got for Christmas from a friend. It's called Binti by Nnedi Okorafor. Science fiction. I am loving it. I'm right at the beginning, but I'm already loving it.
Yeah, that one was highly recommended last year. I think it came across my feed. Yeah. I have it here somewhere, but I haven't read it yet. So
I recommend it. I mean, at least the beginning is great.
Yeah. What is the best advice you've ever received? And this could be life advice, career advice, or whatever.
Okay, best. I think not necessarily the best, but a very useful one is to be open. And that means being open to learning new things, being open to new experiences. I think a lot of times we want to reach a point where we are a master in our craft and we no longer need to learn, but that's simply not possible. And it's possible to be confident in your skills, to trust your instincts, but it's important to be open to hear different perspectives, different voices, to learn from different cultures, different ways of doing the things you've been doing for a long time. So I guess keep learning, keep being open to learning. It's important.
Love it. If you could sit down with any 4 people, living, dead, any time in history, and play a game, first of all, who would it be? And second of all, what would you play? And this could be video game, tabletop, board game, whatever.
Okay, so I have to confess that I spent a long time thinking about this answer because you said it to me before.
I sent this one out on purpose, yeah.
Yeah, and I had to rope in a few friends and my brother to talk this over, and people had lots of different opinions here, but we finally got to our solution. So I would play Dungeons and Dragons because I think it's a good classic. We are used to the general classes, the moral standpoints kind of thing. So I think it's a classic for a reason. Mm-hmm. And I was hoping for the most chaotic group. I really just want to be the DM, just watching the world burn. Mm. So for our leader, or Templar, or lawful good, we would have Joan of Arc.
Oh, that's a good one.
Then for our rogue, or trickster, con artist with pirate backstory, we have Anne Bonny.
Nice.
For the bard, and this one was the most controversial one because it didn't really fit the theme, but I just really wanted. So our bard, with the heart of gold, chaotic good, we would have Sid O'Connor. I just really want to play with her.
Nice.
And our wild card, I'm not sure about the class. For sure, a chaotic neutral, I guess. Chaotic neutral feels good. Wild card, maybe a barbarian, maybe a monk, maybe just a guy. Benny DeVito.
There you go. That would be chaotic. Yeah.
Yes. I'm here for the chaos.
That was crazy. Wow. Could you imagine Joan of Arc and wow.
Benny DeVito, I want to see that.
Incredible. Do you DM? Like, do you run a game? Are you a DM?
I've done it in the past.
Yeah.
I usually prefer being a character. But yeah, I've DM'd a few times in the past.
That would be a challenging one. That's so cool. I love it.
That would be very
Fantastic. Okay. We're almost done here. Before we start moving to the door, usually I let people plug stuff right now and mention what you're working on. Obviously, it's Nightingale.
Yeah, I mean, we are just releasing Nightingale, so it went on early access 2 weeks ago, and we are planning, this is something that I really hope I can keep working on for years to come. Yep. We really love our game, and we are really excited about it. I'm really happy to see people finally playing it. We've been playing it for so long, but now we get to see people playing it with us. We can share it with our friends as well and join worlds with our friends. But honestly, just watching all the Twitch streams and the feedback on Reddit, and I mean, it's an early access game, so we know there are many areas that we want to keep working on. Hearing feedback from players is amazing. Sometimes it's really hard to pinpoint exactly what players want out of the experience. So even with all the play tests we had, we had open beta, but at some point when you really put it to a larger audience to get all that feedback, it's so valuable. So I would love to invite everyone to go play Nightingale, give us your feedback, and we will be super happy to listen to it and probably do something about it.
Wonderful. And because it's early access, I know you can't tell me much, but I assume there's lots more narrative stuff coming, and we get to learn more about the world and explore more. And yeah,
I cannot share.
I know.
But I'm working there, and I am a narrative designer, so everything I do is narrative. So
there you go. The future is bright.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's it. That painless, easy. Before I close up shop and put down the fire and turn up the chairs, I would love for you to have the last word. So do you have any closing thoughts or words of wisdom to walk us out the door?
Well, first of all, I just really want to thank you for having me here. I think it's so important to have places where we can actually talk about storytelling for games with a critical mindset. It's not just about, it's pure entertainment. No, that it's a hard craft, and there's meaning, there's a message, everything that, art can do. Video game is art, so we need to keep talking about it so we can get the craft to evolve, to get more people involved, to keep innovating. So spaces like this where we encourage people to engage with the material and understand how it's made and the dangers, the good and the bad, it's really important. And another thought, just if anyone listening wants to keep the conversation going, I offer free mentorships to aspiring writers or even long-time writers, anyone who might be looking to advance their career or just learn more, talk about narrative design. So just go to my website. It's my name, barbaraframil.com, and you can see a page there to schedule some one-on-one time with me, and I would be very happy to help and talk more about narrative design.
And there you have it, dear listeners. the end of a captivating conversation with Bárbara Framil, illuminating the craft of narrative design through the lenses of game design theory. Bárbara, your insights into the intricate weaving of emotion, story, and player experience has left us all spellbound. So, as I draw this episode to a close, I want to thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today. And dear listener, thank you for taking a seat at the table. Until next time, may you continue your journey through the realms of gaming with newfound clarity and inspiration. Keep exploring, creating, and sharing those stories. Stay safe, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop by the corner of story and game.